All right, so this video is going to focus on how to factor a sum of cubes example here. All right, so first off, either you're working a problem and you're told, hey, this is a sum of cubes, or maybe you figured it out that you need to use the sum of cubes for it. Now, there are a couple different things that you need to look for in order to figure out if it is a sum of cubes example. Because when it does come to factoring, unfortunately, there are so many different factoring techniques out there. I know that it can be very confusing trying to figure out which type of factoring technique is this one, how do I factor this one, or what technique am I going to use with this current example. So in order for it to be a sum of cubes example, all right, there are a couple of different things that you need to look for, just in case maybe you're not told that it is a sum of cubes. Now, the first thing, the most obvious thing, is the fact that you have two terms in your example. So we're going to start with this example over here, right? Sum of cubes. So I have two terms in my example here. Now, this is the sum of cubes, which means you're adding two cubes together. So for this one here, you're going to have a plus sign in between your two terms here. So these are both positive. You have a plus sign in between them. So that's the second criteria, that they're both positive. The third thing is that they're all perfect cubes. So both of their terms in your example have to be a perfect cube. So a perfect cube is just the same thing times the same thing times the same thing to get that. So for example, what times what is an s cubed, and then what times what is an 8. Right? And before we get into figuring out what that is, as long as it meets all three of those criteria, then you know that you do have the sum of cubes. And I went ahead and I put the formula for sum of cubes right over here on the board. All right, so if you have the sum of cubes, if you have an x cubed plus a y cubed, then it's going to factor into the following. So you'll have this binomial right over here, followed by this lovely trinomial over here. Right, so the main thing when it comes to sum of cubes, though, is figuring out what is that x, what is that y, so that you can now plug into this formula right over here. So let's figure out what is our x and what is our y, because the rest of it is just going to be a plug and chug game for us over here. So x is just what times what is that first term. What times what is an s cubed. And the only way to get an s cubed is an s times an s times an s. Then looking for our y is what times what is this 8. All right, 1 times 1 times 1, 2 times 2 times 2, so on. Now 8 is fairly small. 8 is actually a 2 times a 2 times a 2. All right, so my y is 2. Now that we know what our x and what our y are, it's a matter of plugging into this formula. So starting with the x plus y. So add your x plus y together. So for us, that's an s plus a 2. All right, so s plus 2. Then in our trinomial, always start with squaring your x. All right, so this is my x, it's this s, and so square s, which s squared is s squared. Minus is part of the formula. X times y, s times 2, 2 times s. Make sure you always put the number in front. Last thing, so drop down that plus sign, square your y term. Our y term is a 2, so if we square 2, 2 times 2 is 4. We are done after we've plugged into this formula. We are done with our example here. This is our final answer. Do remember when it comes to anything, when it comes to factoring, you can always multiply back out your answer to make sure that you do get the original problem there. So you can always check your work when it comes to factoring. But for this one here, again, make sure it does meet the 3 criteria that fits the sum of cubes, and make sure you definitely have this formula available to you or you have it memorized in order to do this problem.